everyone. For decades, the job of a security tool has been to find problems. It scans your code, floods your developers with alerts, and then leaves the hardest part, the fix, up to you. But what if that entire model is wrong? What if a security tool could act less like an alarm system and more like an expert engineer on your team? My guests today have built exactly that. Surag Patel and Arshan Dabirsiaghi are the co-founders of Pixee, a company that is fundamentally shifting the paradigm of security from detection to resolution. The platform uses a combination of agentic AI and deterministic logic to not just find vulnerabilities, but to automatically fix them and deliver a ready-to-merge pull request. Early customers are seeing a 91% reduction in the time developers spend on fixes. This isn't just an improvement, it's a transformation. Surag and Arshan, welcome to the Boring AppSec podcast.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate it.
Is there anything else that you folks want to add to whatever I've introduced for the company?
No, I think you've done it exactly right, Anshuman. I think our whole objective when we started Pixee was to solve, in many ways, the last mile of AppSec, which is arguably the most painful and the most manual to date. Having been part of teams that have built SaaS tools, RASP tools, IaaS tools, name whatever AppSec tool you want has probably been built between somewhere on our team. I think the challenge that we all felt was no matter how much better those tools get, the challenge of remediation and the outcomes that enterprises actually want has still always been hard to achieve. And I think that's kind of the challenge that we set off to solve with Pixee. So thanks for having us on. We're excited to talk through this. We know both of you are really AppSec true, and we look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, awesome. So my first question is to you, Arshan. You've spoken about creating virtual security engineers, right? Looking 5 years or maybe 3 years into the future, what is the role of the human AppSec professional in a world where AI agents can triage, fix, and validate code automatically? Does the AppSec team shrink, or does the role of an AppSec engineer evolve into something more strategic, like managing a fleet of AI agents?
Yeah, it'll be some mix of what you said. So where I'm thinking we're going is, right now we're going to be in the next 0 to 5 years. And then if we want to predict 5 to 10, I think we're all, guessing a lot, but, we'll see. So I think for the next 5 years, managing a fleet of agents and using our AppSec folks to really be force multipliers, using agents to become force multipliers on our existing AppSec teams is going to be a really successful pattern. And so let's do that wherever we can. But there's still a lot of things that are a little bit more strategic to the business, a little bit more, that require a little bit more knowledge about the organization. Where do we do training? How do we do training? What percentage of our apps get what kinds of attention? Other kind of strategic decisions that have to be made. I think there's going to be a lot of that. When we want to make architectural decisions about identity, authorization, and our strategies for that. I think all of those decisions require a lot more and knowledge about the legacy systems and where you want to go, and so I think there's the business roots are in a lot of stuff that we're not going to be handing off to agents anytime soon. But one really particularly exciting outcome for me, I know that you all have the same experience. Sort of dirty little secret in AppSec that what apps get attention, is probably the 5 to 10% of the top most critical, most sensitive assets. And so what I'm most excited about is scaling that coverage through the use of agents. And so, there's been some breaches. I think the target one is a good example of where, the asset that was attacked was not the front door, e-commerce app. It was, if I remember correctly, it was HVAC, sort of contractor subsystem, which, the threat model for that was very different. But attackers think in graphs and defenders think in lists. And so the attacker found the soft spot. And so that, if I had to speculate, it wouldn't be surprising to me, I should say, if that was one of those assets that got looked at and said, look, this is, if we do the threat model here, it's probably a class 4 instead of a class 5, and thus it got the maybe didn't receive the same attention. Again, just speculating here. So if
Yeah.
we can just do that, I mean, if we can just scale the coverage of the processes and the tools and all the stuff that we do today to the broad base of applications, I know if I was in the AppSec seat, I'd feel a lot better. So that's what, where I'm trying to get to for the next 5 years. It's like, let's scale the AI agents to, cover a lot more of the base and deliver just like a much more firm ground across all of our assets.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point. I kind of get a little frustrated when I talk to folks and say, okay, are you replacing AppSec teams or are you like augmenting AppSec teams? And I'm like, honestly, neither. The reality is that there are two ways of managing risks today in application security teams. One is you do something to mitigate it or you accept it. And very often we're accepting a lot of risk. And we're doing that because the cost of kind of not accepting the risk and doing something about it is too damn high, right? So if you have to 4x in our case, we kind of try to get into on the design stage. If you have to 4x your design, threat modeling team to scale threat modeling, that's too much. That talent doesn't exist. And even if they exist, it's really hard to motivate them, keep them motivated, and it's very expensive. But on the other hand, if you can 4x the productivity of your existing team, then you will have to accept a lot fewer risks, right? And to me, you hit the nail on the head when you said that the real problem, I think, the new age of AppSec teams, companies and teams should tackle is how do I get my coverage up and how do I not have to make a decision between, do I review this or do I review that, right? So if you can take that decision making out of the hand of humans and then have other tools do it and only gets humans involved when needed, I think that would be a genuine leap in how AppSec's done. So fully with you on that.
Yeah, the thing I would add is, this pattern, I think you see throughout the use of AI all AI companies. I mean, there really is not many AI companies that are not human in the loop still.
Yeah.
And so we have to, in sort of by definition there, we will need the humans in the seats with the background knowledge to verify and bless a lot of what we got, the value we're going to be delivering.
I was just going to add, to this point of I agree, Sandesh, completely. There's AppSec teams today, we probably can all count on our hands the number of teams that truly feel their AppSec program is fully efficient and sufficient and covers everything they need. There's probably very few, if any, companies in the world. That only gets worse now as we know developers start creating more code with all their AI coding agents. And guess what? Half the time we don't even talk about on the attacking side, the velocity is about to go up 100x as well. It's not just the production side, right? And so I think it's going to skyrocket. I have I won't name the company just to be safe, but I've talked with a couple of CISOs at the premier model companies, the state-of-the-art model companies, and their CISOs themselves have kind of told me point blank directly, we don't have enough AppSec programs. Here's what we need. And they're using all the latest AI tooling. And so for them, it's also always going to be, we need the humans to do the management of the AI and the agents. We need them to enforce the policy, to decide here is what is strategically important to us. But we won't need them to do the manual, tedious things that we've never had enough of them to do anyways to begin with, right? And so we need the scalability and the automation where candidly there should have been automation for the last 10 years. We've just never been able to achieve it. And then we need them to focus on where we believe they will add the most value, right? Which is to your point of where should we focus our energy? We're never going to be able to cover every single thing, but what risk are we willing to accept? That a human AppSec leader needs to make that decision, right? As we continue going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. All three of you are building a company. I'm on the other end, right, where I'm actually trying to solve AppSec problems. And even though I don't want to represent my employer in this podcast, I will say this is, I think you folks understand the problem here, right? The pace at which software development is changing, the volume, the quantity, the security risk, all of those have just skyrocketed. And I'm seeing this firsthand myself. And I think the idea that coverage is definitely something that we have struggled for the longest time. And I think the coverage problem is only going to get worse now, right? Because we weren't covering anyways, even 50-60% of all of our code bases. And, with AI sort of helping speed the velocity, it's only going to get worse. And the other aspect I want to mention is this idea of an autonomy slider, right? Where you don't have to build a fully autonomous AppSec assistant or a virtual security engineering platform. But if you give that flexibility to the end user or to an AppSec engineer of how much automation you want the agent to do versus how much you want to do, I think there's so much leverage that teams can use with that approach. Because there are certain use cases like go and retrieve this sort of document from a particular service. These are things that you don't really require a lot of intelligence or smartness. These are things that you could fully automate it. So yeah, like as folks are building in the space, I think this is just something I look for as an AppSec a leader, is how much autonomy, like how do you decide what the scale should look like, and how much flexibility do you want to give to the end user versus be very opinionated about a platform. Right. So I'm curious to sort of see if like any of you have any strong opinions on this idea of the autonomy slider.
Yeah, I like the idea. So we've got something similar where we make, for every vulnerability. First of all, if we back up, like Pixie's thing that we do today is we triage and fix static analysis results. And so we're going into other stuff, but for today, that's how you can think about us. And so for every result, we will do a sort of deep investigation of a finding and come to a conclusion like, hey, this is a terminal conclusion, like, hey, this is a false positive, this is a true positive, this is a likely true positive, or some classification like that. And so what you do with that information is sort of our slider. So we've had integrations with tools where you'd say you just use our recommendation. But we always caution people, like, we want to crawl, walk, run with that, right? Like, we want to verify that the accuracy, meets your standards of quality as well as our own. But yeah, I absolutely think that the slider can walk all the way up to where we close a risk or where we issue a fix. And then I think there, for now, absolutely any level of autonomy before that, I'm super comfortable with. But I sort of like, I always want to walk up to that line. So I would put it back on you, like, what is the value in going anywhere below that line?
Yeah. I think when it comes to code fixes, I am generally, as a security engineer, I can understand how code works, how to break it, what it is doing, right, at a high level. But when you ask me to go and fix something, I don't really know the best practices of the engineering teams. I don't really know what their preferences are. So I think as a security engineer, I would rather have somebody else do that fix in a way that that engineering teams actually want it to be, right? Now, how accurate can you make this process work? I don't know. I think this is the challenge with all of the sort of companies building this space, right? Like, if you are proposing that you can automatically fix bugs, are you doing it in a way that gets accepted without any follow-up comments or any other changes? I think that should be a metric that companies measure themselves against, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way we think about it. So, like, it's funny, the way you say that is our point as well, is in this world of what level of autonomous nature do you want to provide to any given team or person, or let the end user make that decision. From a vendor side, it's like, it's simple not simple. It's like, let's build a massive amount of complexity of configurability on customization, on how each and every user wants, right? Arshan and I have this internal thing, like, you have to earn the right to add complexity. Like, adding more and more features, you have to earn that right based on customers asking about it or actually truly needing it. But I think one of the interesting things is, like, to your point, for us in the world of fixing, at least the triaging is a little different, but the fixing, it actually is very simple. You can measure without any argument a merge rate, and you can measure interactivity rates and how often developers accept things. And for us, that is the center of the universe. How do we drive triaging and remediation and fixing that achieves the maximum merge rates? Because the only people merging are developers, A, and B, when they merge, they're taking some level of responsibility for what's going into their code base at this point, right? Because they're the ones clicking the button. And so we agree completely. Like, I think that's the way that we look at it. And the nice thing is it's not a novel new metric. It's actually very simple, and it's in every SCM system that exists on this planet. We can quantify that and measure that, which is exactly the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is where there's some meaningful distance between us and, some of the other folks who are sort of doing this as an add-on. Like, let me describe one thing that I see in all these add-on features versus like Pixie. So log, if you're familiar with the log, I'm sorry to get in the weeds here, but there's a log injection vulnerability that's reported by all these tools where attacker can provide new lines in a log value, and that they could theoretically forge a new log entry and maybe confuse forensics. It's a very I can't think of a single breach that's ever happened, of course, because of this. But the way that the naively how the models will fix this is to just call dot replace on the string with /r/n, and Pixie will do something different. We'll import a method, and it just the difference between like how a developer sees, you want me to litter my code with like these dot replace calls all throughout them. Or maybe we can configure the logger once, or we can at least use a method to make it a little bit more tidy. That's a big difference in the merge rate, and it seems like very small, but I actually think our data suggests that those kind of changes make it much more clean. Or if our triage process says like, hey, nobody cares about log injection, just close it and move on. It's not a big deal, because to your point. By the time Anshuman's thinking about fixing a thing, you've already done the hard work, which is like triaging that it's real, breaking it, and 80% of the time you look at it and it wasn't real. So that's where we see a big difference for us. Is like fixing is, yes, an important part, but like the triage is super, super important.
Yeah. So just want to make a comment there and then a follow-up question, right? So I think on the whole, the autonomy slider thing, you hit upon something really interesting, Anshuman, and Surag as well. I think as companies building in the space or users of AI products or even builders of AI tools, there's no consensus on what the UX should be for an AI first application. And I think that's kind of the problem, right? I think, I think kind of ChatGPT did the one thing where they kind of popularized the chatbot, and I think Cursor did something interesting where they essentially gave like an autonomy switch instead of a slider. They gave like a chatbot as well as a tab-based thing in the same UX, right? So they kind of said, hey, the choice is yours. So they kind of gave what Anshuman said, but I kind of feel like as we're building CISO, every time the models get better, we kind of feel like new kinds of UX unlocks. Right. So when we started, we had to be all in on RAG because context windows were so small that we didn't have an option. So the moment you have RAG, you have retrieval, you have chunks, which means that the scans take longer, which means that I have to ask you to go away and come back when something's complete. Right. But when context windows go up, scans, assessments get faster. I can probably do something at a click of a button and give you like an immediate response. Now, that seems like a boring model upgrade, but in reality, it has profound impact on UX, right? So my sense is that, the autonomy slider is one really good example of kind of a UX pattern changing in AI applications. But my sense is every time an underlying model gets better, unfortunately, we'll have to rethink how UX should be for every AI app, which is kind of weird because at least when I started, the only UI I was familiar with was the typical SaaS app thing, right? You have a SaaS app, you can log in, you have the same thing, right? You have a landing page, you have a sign up, you start testing. If you're doing something on the GitHub level, then it's a PR comments. It's a very, very, the UX for SaaS apps or dev productivity apps was set in stone for a really long time. And now it's all changed. And it all changes every time some model company improves their model, which I think is like super interesting, right? So that's the point on the autonomy slider. Surag, one other question for you on something interesting you were talking about, right? The one question I've always had on code fixing, and this is kind of from my consulting days as well, is that code fixing was, it kind of almost felt like they were two different kingdoms, and they don't want to kind of like fight with each other. The security folks are like, hey, I'll call stuff out and I'll try and be respectful and give you as much information as possible, but I'm never going to take ownership of the fixes because that's like your fiefdom, right? And I don't want to step on your toes, you don't step on my toes, and that's one paradigm, right? Which you guys have try to kind of break out of. The second paradigm is that I kind of feel like non-security teams never pay for security products. right? Now, I'm not going to ask you questions about business model, like not that kind of a podcast. But in general, is the idea that developers are feeling so much pain from security teams, from all the security bugs that are being reported, that they'll pay or they'll decide to use technology to solve this? Or is it that the security team says, hey, I will go one step further. I'll not just tell you that there's a vulnerability, but I'll also tell you here's the fix. And then your job is much simpler. All you got to do is really review code, right? So how do you think, how do you folks think about this?
Yeah, look, we come from AppSec, right? Arshan and I both spent time together at Contrast. We know the AppSec persona like through and through. Like we spent many years of them from the beginnings of like the whole DevSec. As a matter of fact, defining the DevSecOps term and kind of being part of that generation for many years. I think when we started Pixee, actually our vision and our plan was very simple. We actually talked to, what was it, 384 developers, like that. Not AppSec people, actual hand-on keyboard developer at every seniority and every size company before we built anything, as a matter of fact, at Pixee. And the answer was the same from everybody at every single level, at every single company. And it was simply, I don't give a shit. I don't want to do this. Do it for me. Stop sending me more work. That's not my day job, was quite literally what they basically told us, is stop sending me Jira tickets of things that I then start this snowball of candidly wastage of time within the organization, right? What do development teams do today or have done in the past? I say this and they just laugh because they know it's true. They get a bunch of Jira tickets or findings from whatever scanner that they're using, or in most cases scanners in the bigger companies. Select all, mark false positive, send it back to AppSec teams, right? Like it's truly what happens. So now what happens? You've just wasted hundreds of hours of Anshuman and his team's time to go prove exploitability or do things like where we spend time prioritizing our work, like all this stuff. These are all artifacts of wasting time, honestly, in an organization because remediation is so painful and difficult and being forced on a person it's not what they want to do. It's not what maybe they can do it, but they just don't want to do it. And so I think to your point, Sanders, like our whole kind of where we got to is like that point is like, if and when we can make the process of triaging and remediation as simple as possible with all the evidence and transparency and visibility that both AppSec teams need and development teams need, a lot of the other time wastage that we're doing today should go away. Like a lot of the time we spend on proving exploitability. Yes, we all know it's valuable. Yes, we all know you do it. But why do we do it? To triage away useless findings so we don't waste our time on it, right? That's the whole point. Or we prioritize stuff. Prioritizing 5,000 things is only moderately helpful. If I can just like get rid of 4,000 of them because they're not real and then automate 800 of them, now I only have 200 things to prioritize. It makes life a lot easier in that way. And so, it's a long answer, but I think my point is like, we built for that persona. Like the developers are the times we want to save time for and reduce all of the toil that is like all these things around DevX. AppSec is exactly opposite of every DevX principle you have on your programs, right? So our idea is like they're the ones who pull and want it because we're solving a pain point that they've always had. But our buyers, the people that pull us in, are AppSec teams because what do they want? They still want outcomes, right? I'm sure you're measured on time to remediation, number of outstanding vulnerabilities, like how quickly are you burning things down? But those aren't 100% in your control. You have a reliance on development to achieve those. And so we have this nice kind of luxury of the team that has the budget and typically buys these tools actually have a vested interest in burning these things down, making those metrics better. And the team that has been on the critical path to achieving that, we're now reducing their pain immensely, right? We're not getting rid of it completely, but as much as we can reduce it is our objective.
Yeah.
And let me join you on the therapy couch as well as, the AI models do change constantly. And most of the time they change for the better when a new model comes out. But sometimes their performance degrades too. So there's some. So I think the partner you have to select in this space, not just in our space and other spaces, is about who's going to be best at surfing these ups and downs, because they're the ones who are going to figure out how to give you the right, extract the best, take out the worst, and give you the most value. And the other thing too is I really love your point about the UX breaking. But what I think is going to be very easy for companies to accept in the short term is something that looks like what their peers, something that appears as another peer. And so while Perplexity is shipping a browser, in the last couple of days, and OpenAI is maybe coming out with a browser, they're trying to come up with new UX patterns that are more, totally different way of interacting. Right now, if we just appear as a peer in GitHub, that's not a violent, adjustment for them to make. And so I think appearing as a human and following that form factor, I think is good advice in the short term. And then once you feel super limited by that in some way, and then the next disruption requires something different, let's go get that.
Yeah. There are a few angles I want to take this, so I'm trying to think what would be the best. Actually, considering the fact that, Pixie's focus is on triaging and remediation, actually driving issues to remediation. One sort of question I have in this space is, so when you say that you do deep research on when you're trying to triage a finding, you obviously have to understand, if it is exploitable, what's the context, all of that stuff. But generally, this context or these contexts exist in internal services, internal systems that most vendor tools don't have access to, and for obvious reasons, privacy, security, what have you. So I'm curious to know, how is Pixie thinking about doing this extensive triaging process, and how do you know if the outcome that you've come to is actually accurate or not? Because there's so much business context that gets lost in making these decisions, and you won't have all of that information until you integrate really closely with all of the internal services and systems.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a shot at that. So we have, we connect to a few systems today. So first of all, let me point out that another thing that sort of meaningfully sets us apart is that we run in your premise. There are a lot of solutions that run in the cloud only. And so, yes, it's going to be much tougher, maybe never functional to quite connect those to your internal tools. But for us, that's not as much of a problem. And we connect to a few data sources today where we can look at the wider technical context of all the code and look at the other results you have and sort of connect to your tool. But yeah, we plan on connecting with more and more data sources over time. You can imagine us connecting to your Wiz and to your, to your logging systems and seeing does this thing actually get hit at runtime? I mean, estimating blast radius. Yeah. So if you just look at the code, you can't tell that there's a RASP there maybe. And so, there's context there that cannot be seen, but so you always have to we always adjudicate based on what we know. If we can tell from within the code that it is a false positive, it is, you probably don't need any other compensating controls to discuss it. But if it looks like a true positive based on the context we have, that's what we're going to report. But yeah, we'll keep adding on and adding on.
I think on the piece of validating that it's right, a big part of what goes into our system now is there's this, what everyone in AI talks about, there's these increasingly different models that we all start to employ, right? So for us, reinforcement learning becomes a very important model when you think about how do we make sure that we not only are triaging and fixing well, but we're doing it in the way that that specific customer expects us to do it, whether it's the developer, the team, the company, the secure development policy, whatever it might be. That kind of constant ongoing learning, just through simple human interactions, allows us to continue making sure that we do it in exactly the right way. And to the point is it's funny. Someone, a CISO actually mentioned this to me, who said it to me the other way around. He's like, I know I just asked you about how often is the accuracy of your triaging and fixing, but he's like, I actually trust your system more than I trust my humans because they're probably inaccurate more so than your system because of the evidence we provide. So when we do a triage, we show you full context. There's these 8 security controls you have. We see 4 of them. These other 4 are actually, 3 of them are not valid because we actually see this. It looks like it's happening in a test file because of this reasons. And this 8th one is not there. But guess what? Because of all the other context we have and what's happening with the data flow and where it's at, we're telling you it's, a note severity. It's not actually a medium or critical or high or whatever the standard output was of the scanner, right? So that evidence, I think, gives them all the ammunition they need. And I think the last piece I would just add is there was one case, Arshan can add if there was any additional context, but where the AppSec engineer basically said, hey, look, just you pulling all this context together for me and giving it to me in this write-up saved me 6 hours of time, because otherwise I have to try and understand this code, pull it from there, put this context together, know that there's 8 different ways or controls I should have. And it's just all there for them in one place. And then for them to even validate the triage decision that Pixee made is now a 5-minute process rather than an 8-hour process in that context.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I think as an AppSec engineer myself, I think I spend probably more than I should in just kind of gathering the context, like you said. So I think AppSec problem is more of a visibility and coverage problem than actually, other things that we keep thinking about, right? Because if you think about it, like the AppSec teams are generally a consulting team within an organization, where if an engineering team is trying to build something, if they have questions, they come to us. Now, when they come to us and they ask us to do a security review, if we don't understand about this system, what they're building, if we don't have a good understanding, holistic view of security controls, then the review that we'll provide or the recommendations that we'll provide might not even be accurate, right? So I think, like if you are building this space, I think the focus should be on how do you make your AppSec engineers empowered with all of the information that they need to be able to make that decision, right? And I think that's really strong. I mean, that's something that I've wanted as an AppSec engineer throughout my career. So I'm glad that you're thinking about it from that perspective. Yeah. Surag, you mentioned something about, like when we were speaking about autonomy slider, you mentioned something about building that trust, right? I think, so I've been playing with a Claude code a lot recently, and I think the way they have approached this sort of form factor, I really like it. So in a nutshell, if you're trying to have Claude code execute a command or do something, it will give you 3 options. Yes for this like session, and no, and explain Claude code how to do or how to go about it, right? And I find this really compelling because, there are certain commands, like I don't want to hit accept every time, right? I want the system to gain my trust. And if the system will ask me those options, it's easy for me to see, okay, how, what commands, am I allowing the system to run versus what commands I need some supervision, right? So I think the concept of autonomy slider from this like form factor, it's a very simple CLI, but it allows the flexibility to an end user to choose, right? So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, it's funny, the notion of trust, actually, when we went out and raised our seed capital, what was our 5th slide or 6th slide in our deck, the title was just trust. Like, you have to earn trust of a developer in this context. You don't start with trust. You don't have trust. Like, you got to earn it. And one of the things that we, early days in our as we're building, one of the things that we decided was like, hey, look, to build trust, if you think about even your own, in any context, right, whether it's personal or professional or security, to build trust, you have to take like small baby steps towards building that trust, right? You have to like, do one thing and you have to do it perfectly well and really good, and then you build that little bit of trust, and then the next thing maybe is a little bit bigger, and the next thing is a little bit bigger. And so when we first actually started making fixes, like we had this free GitHub app that we were using for a while, we would just start by providing fixes of things that like almost nobody would ever argue. Like, they were just always perfectly good and easy fixes. They were like things that developers can like say, oh yeah, that's great, makes sense, totally accept it. It didn't mean that they were like, we weren't fixing like SQL injection, for example, because it may be a more complicated fix, but not because we couldn't, more because it's like trust is a journey, or you got to build this over some time. And so, it's funny. This is like one of those perfect examples of like the dichotomy between dev teams and AppSec teams or security teams. With dev teams, they were like, that's fantastic. You get me to accept or like build this merge acceptance rate for the first 3 or 4 or 5 things. And after that, guess what? You've now built enough trust where like the next time you come back to me with a more complicated PR, I'll probably be more inclined to trust it because you've already built some level of trust before. And so we would drive fixes based on like the types of things that are most likely to get accepted, not necessarily the most risky things or the critical vulnerabilities or things like that. And then you go talk to security teams and they're like, whoa, no. Just send all the critical stuff first, and then send the high, and then send the medium. It's like to your point, like that's not necessarily the answer to get to what you want, which is maximum acceptance rates and merge rates that we talked about earlier. And so this thing of trust, I think, is so paramount here. And like for us, it's inherent in everything we do. Like a big part of it is like that same mental math is when we're making fixes, when we're doing triage, you can't build trust until you give evidence, you give proof, you show, allow users to customize and decide things. And so like, Sandesh, to your point earlier, just yesterday, Arshan and I were talking about some new stuff on the roadmap. And part of that was like a new interface, if I may, driven by what's capable of the latest models right now, where it allows a user, an AppSec person, to be able to build trust with the results, maybe ask it a few more questions and deal with it in a different way, or say, hey, yeah, I saw you did that. That makes sense. But why don't you try this over here? And then allow it to kind of iterate a little bit as if it's their partner and they're having immediate response times, right? And so I think Anshul, to your point, like trust is absolutely paramount here. How do you get developers to accept high rates of changes? They have to build trust with both AppSec team and the systems that we're using. And that's not easy. That takes time, and that takes very conscious designing and UX that allows you to achieve that.
Yeah, I think you make a really interesting point. So when I was running the security team at Razorpay, when I was kind of a little more of a Anshuman hat, right? The interesting thing I learned is that security folks always think from a risk perspective. So their point is, hey, whatever is the total highest risk, like you mentioned, like let's tackle that first. If it's a SQL injection, that's way more important than some configuration error, right? Because it's complex, it's harder, the impact may be higher. But developers almost always think about backlog and releases, right? So for them, they have debt, which they want to reduce over time, but they don't really want hard deadlines on those. But then they don't want to have, like the good engineers, they don't want to introduce new things, new bad things for sure. So they want to have zero tolerance on new bad things, but on existing bad things, they kind of want to be a little more lenient. They want to take a little more measured approach. But the security folks are like, no. How does it matter if it's a new bad thing or an old bad thing? It's a freaking bad thing. So focus on the bad thing, right? So yeah. So when you build a tool which has to be used by security and by developers, you have, you're right. It's tricky to figure out kind of like which gallery to play to, because like you said, it's just like, it's one of those things where there are just like different goals. But yeah, look, at least from a code fixing perspective or in an AppSec perspective, my sense is that the primary stakeholder may be AppSec, but the primary stakeholder of the primary stakeholder is the developer, right? So unless we kind of find a way to speak that language, we're going to have a hard time convincing any AppSec team or developer team to kind of listen to us. But I thought the point you made about having two different kind of goals really interesting, and I've kind of absolutely noticed that as well.
Yeah, we have two different you can configure different workflows in Pixie, and one of them is, yes, when there's a pull request and something bad is discovered, we fix the bad thing. And some AppSec teams are, that's where they have to start, right? They're just like, let's at least stop the bleeding, and then they'll have a backlog and they got to figure out how to get there, and that's tougher because then you're horse trading against a big thing. And so that's why one of the type of workflows we offer is a fix orchestration campaign. We call it the backlog burn down, where like we'll just take a fix off the backlog, a single conceptual issue, like a single SQL injection, and we'll send it to you on whatever cadence you want. You want it daily or weekly. And so the product slice that gets you to fix that business problem, you're right, is totally different. And the primary person there is to talk to is the developer. And so like, yeah, it absolutely will. It results in a meaningfully different product if you think about what to do about the backlog differently from what you do for the new
change
code.
management. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I kind of feel like a lot of this is like stock versus flow, right? And a lot of the effort is always on flow, and what you need to do to stem the flow is very different from what you need to do to reduce the stock, right? And I think you're right. You just need like two different approaches. The underlying technology may be the same, but the design of the solution and the kind of cadence is required, the empathy that is needed is completely different in both cases, and the patience levels are also kind of like different, right? So I'm kind of with you on taking two different approaches.
Yeah, one thing we've heard that is another way, like more the development, the technology, the development management team thinks about it is to your point of, so then you talk about like, they don't want to have this work that's like unknown in different ways. And so like what we generally hear is like unplanned work. You all know this. Unplanned, if you've in your sprint planning, unplanned work is the worst thing that can come up because it messes everything up, right? It throws your schedule out the window. You got to get the right team. You got to reassign people. Like that is the objective, is like, how do we eliminate and reduce as much unplanned work as possible for a development team? And I shouldn't say most, oftentimes, very often, that unplanned work is security work, right? That is a challenge as well. Like that's why it doesn't get prioritized, or you can only do I only have 6 story points to fix one thing. I can't fix the 25 things you sent me. So pick one, security team. And so I think that's kind of the way that we think about it. And that was actually something I learned from having talked with a few CIOs and CTOs. Like, their point is, if you tell me you can take my unplanned work from this to this, let's do this. Let's talk tomorrow, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can turn anything which is a unknown to like a bad known, even that's kind of like very helpful. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
All right, I'm going to take a slight detour here and sort of speak about something that are not technical. So, Surag, this is a question for you. You've recently raised a $15 million seed round to build your GTM team. The market, as we all know, for secure tools is incredibly crowded. How do you cut through the noise and convince enterprise to adopt Pixee when they already have established relationships with large platforms like Sneak, Veracode, SemRep, who are also now adding these AI remediation features?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. We're excited to have raised capital. For us, we spent the first few years making sure we had a fantastic development team, engineering, and product that enterprises could actually trust. And now we're kind of at the position where we're ready to start scaling that out. So you will start hearing a whole lot more about us. We brought on board our first full-time sellers, our first full-time marketers, like literally starting in the next couple of weeks. And so we're excited to kind of make some noise around what we've built. But to your point is, like, how do we differentiate? Arshan and I are very opinionated, having built in this AppSec space for some time, right? Like I said earlier, but like Arshan and our engineers, many of our engineers who've worked together for a long time, have built SaaS tools, like cutting edge SaaS tools, IaaS tools, RASP tools, SCA tools. As a matter of fact, nobody, even to this day, generally will argue the accuracy of things that the IaaS contrast built is still the most accurate tool you can get on the market to find vulnerabilities. Now there's other challenges. But that foundation allowed us to build a lot of opinions that I think are very specifically designed towards enterprises. And so, I think part of this is like, we got to focus on what we know we can do well and where we believe the pain is really massive, where there's a business opportunity for us. And so for us, it's like, we're thinking mid-market plus, like you have to have a few hundred developers at least, because until you have a few hundred developers, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is not yet a massive pain point, right? It'll come when you scale to that level, but today it's not. And so for us, it's like focusing on mid and large size teams, which means they have a few hundred developers or more. In that space, we then have made some decisions, at least to date, that allow us to be more, allow these enterprises to be more open to us. So one of the things Arshan mentioned earlier, for example, our whole stack you can deploy on site in your own VPC or your own cloud. That means you don't have to go through security reviews to send your source code off site, which most companies will not accept, even the most forward-looking companies. The second is, like, you don't have to worry and trust or hope that we're going to use AI safely and not lose your IP or do something with your source code in a way that makes you scared, which it should, because that's a dangerous thing that can be done. And then again, you don't have to send your vulnerability data outside of your environment. So like that's one, like, which is like this self-hosted kind of model thing. But the other 2 or 3 big ones are the second one is like the independence. So we talk about triaging. If 50 to 70 to 80% of your findings are truly false positives, which nobody in AppSec will generally deny, the vendor is not the best person to tell you that. As a matter of fact, it's against their best interest to tell you 80% of the things I just told you are findings are actually not findings. Please throw away the stuff that I sent you because I've now done a more contextually based analysis from your environment on the findings I found, right? So that independence, I think, is super important. And then the third piece of that independence that is critical is most enterprises putting in a new SaaS tool or a new SCA tool or a new DAS tool may provide 5, 10, 15% incremental improvement in terms of accuracy, or maybe it's more natural to a flow or something. That doesn't change any of your outcome metrics, right? Your remediation rates, your MTTR, the number of outstanding issues does not go down at all, as a matter of fact, in that context. And so for us, having kind of been in this space, our whole objective is like, I'm not here to tell you, if this incremental thing is going to go all of a sudden solve all your problems. But the idea is like you need triaging and fixing automation that you've never had before. And you need that to be done at the highest level of quality so that you can build trust and it can truly get to the metrics that you want. And so I think to that point, Anshu, was like focusing on this area where no one has ever denied to us that it's a massive pain point for them and saying, bring whatever scanners you have. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to tell you that you must use ABC or my own proprietary scanner, because that's only an incremental improvement, right? That might make our life easier because we only have to support one. But from a customer or enterprise perspective, we all know they have half a dozen different tools, right? Most Sneak's biggest customers also have Sonar, and Sonar's biggest customers also have Contrast and Veracode and Checkmarks and all these different things. And so we try and be very independent, which I think has been actually one of the biggest differentiators for us in this market. And then the quality of the fixing and the triaging, where we can show things like merge rates being order of magnitudes higher than what they can get from any other kind of add-on incremental AI only thing.
Yeah. Can I just make a point on Anshuman's question itself? I first of all, I don't think the security market is saturated. It really is not, right? I mean, for folks who kind of, live by the news and look at funding announcements every few days, etc., it may feel like it. Or for the ones who go to RSA and Black Hat, it may feel like, which all of us do, we may feel like, oh my God, there are too many vendors. Why are there so many booths? Why are there petting zoos in booths, right? Okay, that's fair. I'm with you that there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the market, right? But I don't think the cybersecurity startup market is saturated. Even the AppSec one is not. There's still so many problems, right? The example I like giving outside security is that if you think about it, Salesforce should have eaten away every CRM tool in the world. And yet there are new CRM companies starting every freaking week and every month, and they're all doing, some of them are doing well, most of them are not, but there's still people trying, right? So I kind of feel like, no matter if there's like a potential startup founder here, don't worry about competition. Like if there are 10 companies who are doing the exact same thing as you do, you can find that one niche which kind of changes things, and then maybe you take over the others, and maybe you don't. But I definitely feel like more and more people should start up in the application security space. There are still many unsolved problems. It doesn't guarantee success, but it definitely, there is room for it, right? And I think one of the advantages of a new technology like AI, which like LLMs, which are very useful for building B2B kind of solutions, is that you can take every old problem and apply a new lens and see if something comes out of it. And many times nothing comes out of it, but when it does, it's kind of like magic, and you can unlock a lot more benefits. So yeah, so I hope more and more companies kind of get started trying to solve old problems, try to with new ways of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, the macro version of what you just said is what's going on with Google right now. I mean, Google has to figure out, they have this giant search business that is being really eaten alive quickly by, these AI first companies. And so they have to figure out, like, do they cannibalize their own business? Is there room for, how much can they change? Because if you come at problems with an AI first solution, AI first lens, you will end up at a meaningfully different place. And so, absolutely. I love all the innovation as well that we see in the market. So I agree with you. Go try to solve a problem in a new way.
Awesome, folks. We are getting close to our sweet 15-minute spot. So I guess one final question before we can call it out. So I'm seeing that security engineers are sort of moving away from code now, obviously with just because of the sheer volume and whatnot. And I think the focus has started to shift more on reviewing design documents, specification documents. I'm also seeing that engineers also, they don't want to write code anymore. If they can come up with a design specification and have all the details of how to do observability, security, blah blah blah, there are agentic tools like Claude Code. Amazon came up with their recently, I think Kiro something. These tools are capable enough of taking these design documents and just kind of going and building things in one shot, right? So. And I see that the world is evolving towards this sort of state where, folks are going to be away from code. I'm not saying they're going to be completely away, but at least that's the direction I'm seeing we're headed towards. So as security professionals and as security vendors trying to build something in this space, how are you considering of integrating security aspects into this design specification space? Because that fundamentally changes how tools and platforms are built, right? Because we have built tools to scan code, go and go and do automatic fixes and whatnot. But now it's more about, you have a specification, now go and build this in a secure way, right? So just kind of curious to see how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think.
Arshan, sorry, go ahead.
Go cover Arshan.
Yeah, look, I'm excited for When I was doing consulting for the first decade of my career, there was no single place to put security and you're done. It was not, you didn't do one practice and you're done. It really, I think we know how to build secure software. It's just extremely expensive and slow. And so I'm excited to inject security into all parts of this. And I'm also highly skeptical that any one place will fix everything because there are limits to what attention can do, and attention in the fundamental primitive of like LLMs. And so I think that yes, if you cram a million things into the design process, I'm sure that it will be meaningfully better. Like I have zero doubt about that. But will you, Anshuman, like trust that we don't need to do anything later because definitely not. And I know that nobody would suggest that. So I think I love the idea where we could kind of influence, we have to influence from afar a little bit, always in security. So I love the idea of influencing as early as possible because the cost of remediation is low, the further left you go. But I think it's going to take a lot of us at every step out of the way. I mean, I think there's going to be 10 new AppSec companies at different stages of if you're just sort of focusing on the SDLC to make the AI enabled secure development happen smoothly.
Yeah. So couple of points there, right? So I think one, as someone kind of building in that secure design review automation space, the one thing is that the thinking, Arshan's right, the thinking is moving a lot more to the design phase. I actually, that's in my head, that's a short-term trend. I don't know what happens in the medium term. A lot of thinking is moving away from coding to thinking or writing prompts. And then and a lot of doing is moving away from coding to reviewing code. Right. And my sense is that, they're going to be companies like Pixie who are going to say, hey, I'm going to make the code review parts of it simpler. And then they're going to be companies like CISO, which will say, I'll make the design parts easier. Right. Again, I'm never going to be in the business of predicting where AI goes because I've not been, it's hard to do, but that's kind of where things seem to be going. But I think, on the second aspect, which I think is a lot more interesting, is that a lot of non-developers are writing code, right? And I kind of come from a consulting background as well. And in the last 15 years, I've trained hundreds of developers on secure coding. OWASP has spent 15 years trying to build solutions for developers to write secure code. And you could argue we've been kind of successful and kind of failed, right? And let's say we give a even 50% success rate to educating developers. Okay, we've never educated product folks. We've never educated designers, and those are the ones checking in code now. Right. So, we were trying to make 50% into 60% coverage for developers. And turns out we left out 100% of other people who are checking in code as well. So I think given those two, I think, no matter what you do in the design stage, again, like I said, I'm building in that space and I'm very bullish about that space as well, like Arshan mentioned. But the reality is that it's kind of like the old consulting saying, right? It's like security has to be like Swiss cheese. Like you've got to have like a stack of Swiss cheeses with holes in different directions. So you've got to kind of have defenses everywhere. And then, for some companies, the design review aspect will be the most important. For others who are assembling code and not writing any code, maybe the whole point is to do everything all the way at the end. But the idea is that you've got to have solutions everywhere. At least that's kind of how I think about it as someone kind of building, in that space.
Yeah,
sorry, Surag, I kind of cut you off. Yeah.
No. I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's the same way we think about it too. Is like in that world, you have like, let's say you get onto like fantastic design that incorporates security and all these other elements. To Arshan's point, that doesn't mean you're going to turn off your sneak scanner in the back, right? Like there's a ton of other spots along the way where things get introduced intentionally or unintentionally by humans or AI, right? Through that journey in that process. And so I think the controls will always have to be there. Like security is a business of being the guardrail, right? We are here to validate and check and confirm. And I think part of that also becomes like, what changes some is like, where do you insert those checks, right? So for us, in many ways, like, if dev teams are bringing in AI coding agents, which they are, the AppSec team has to bring in Pixie to be their balance. And the idea being is the goal is when development teams are creating with, say, really great secure coding policies or practices or designs into Claude Code that just spits out a full thing, or Lovable, for a non-technical person, to your point, Sandesh, you still need to make sure that we reduce the iterations, we reduce the validations, and that the quality of the code coming out is much more secure from the hopefully the first iteration, not the 50th iteration, right? And I think that itself is a massive savings and kind of an objective of the AppSec teams. Like, I need to prove the code is secure at the end of the day, and I need to make it secure with as little effort as possible, and as little time as possible. And so I think we have this multiple, the Swiss cheese analogy, like you have various areas throughout the journey that allow you to do that, and the guardrails and the automation in place to make that happen. So I like the way that Sandesh thought about it, and Ash made questions like, you have these kind of two pieces of the pie that we need to both make sure we're leveling up in this new world, right, that we work in or that we operate in.
Yeah, and look, also plug at the endpoint. Like I think RASP and now ADR, like back in the day when I was making one of those tools, we would put out an open source app that has a bunch of vulnerabilities in it, and then we would put ADR on it and then offer bug bounty on it. And what people could find was nothing after some time. They found things the first little bit, and then they didn't find anything. So I think all the way, and not just, we talk, I know in AppSec, we tend to focus on the development process sort of from the very beginning to the middle. But yeah, then we're going to need production solutions as well. And I would love to see more disruption in the app, attack detection, looking at the analytics and using AI, not sort of traditional AI, but LLM sort of security on the inbound attacks in production. Because I think there's a lot there that we haven't seen enough innovation. So I'm looking forward to the podcast where you interview that founder.
We should do that.
Awesome, folks. Yeah, this has been very insightful. Thank you both, Surag and Arshan. We really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Jubba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.